Well, Carol Ann, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about the readings for the third Sunday of Lent. Scripture readings used at our Catholic Masses and at mainline Protestant services as well. This happens to be the A cycle, so that in the readings at the services, they're on a 3-year cycle, ABC, and so they keep returning. It gives us a great variety and helps us to read large segments of the Bible over a 3-year period. So I want to talk about this third Sunday of Lent, the A cycle, and I suppose what dominates my thinking about it is John's Gospel. It's chapter 4, verses 4 to 42. It's very long. It's about Jesus and the woman at the well, and talking about giving living waters and so on. It's a very familiar passage, and it's sort of a call to conversion in a way, I suppose. The Samaritan woman represents that. Jesus said he's going to give living waters, and it makes me wonder how we can sort of plug into that gospel. And part of the way it seems to me is if we're feeling stagnant in life, that if we're not getting any place and we're sort of in a rut. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that sort of problem, maybe not even feeling a need for conversion.
Maybe that's why lots of us take Lent seriously, Jim, that we come to the end of winter, or we're near the end of winter, and are feeling a little on the dead and perhaps stagnant side, and maybe we look to this season and to readings like this to really refocus us and stir some of those living waters that are within us.
There seems to be a great interest in it. I was lecturing the other night on the whole question of Lent and helping to get people ready for Lent. There was a large number of people that came to the lecture, and it gave me a sense that people are indeed looking for ways to break out or finding new ways to live, or how to make the most out of Lent, which was what the title of the lecture was. So it was very impressive to me that so many people would show up and be interested in that kind of question. And I suppose part of that is our sense that maybe I need to grow or develop, or that I'm not to the place where I'd really like to be.
And I have a thirst. The first reading, I think, kind of sets us up for this.
That's from
this
Exodus
gospel.
17, verses 3 to 7. Yes.
Yeah, you know, the people are complaining because they don't have water, they don't have something to drink. But I think that complaining in our life too, when we're complaining out of our stance of stagnation, it's because we know that we have this deeper thirst, and we are aware we need to get back in touch with that.
Mm-hmm. A thirst, that's an interesting sort of image, isn't it? We often talk about the hunger for things of God, and I wonder if the thirst image has specific sort of coloration to it here. Thirst, think of being in the desert and really needing water. We really need water for life, don't we? I mean, we go longer without food than we can without water. And so we have this thirst for the things of God, and maybe that's sort of built into our very being. That's the way God has made us. He's given us this, as St. Thomas Aquinas said, a natural desire for Him, a thirst for the things of the Spirit. I suppose a lot of that comes because we feel dead that way. I mean, the material world takes us over. You begin to wonder, is the whole process of making it economically and surviving things and going to work, is that satisfying the deeper longings of our spirit, I suppose?
And then when a person has an experience of banging up against some limits from some of those experiences, whether it's with the economy or culture or their family experience, I think that too has the effect sometimes of putting us back in touch with the thirst or the question for meaning. Where am I going? How does this all fit together? And I think that's very much what we see working out in this gospel. As this woman comes, she's coming for water initially, coming for it probably not just for water to drink, but water that was a key part of her daily routine. And maybe it is, a woman looking for meaning as we're looking for meaning.
Well, the gospel does function at various levels, doesn't it? As a lot of the scriptural commentators point out to us. At one level, I mean, it's a story, as you say, of a woman who coming to get some water to take care of her daily needs, and she encounters Jesus, and he engages her in conversation, which in itself is sort of strange. You might point that out as what upset the disciples or caused them wonderment was that Jesus was talking to this Samaritan woman in public. There was a taboo against that. One thing, she's a Samaritan, and there wasn't real kind of interaction between those two groups, the Jews and the Samaritans. And the other thing was that it was a male-female thing, that men were not supposed to be talking to women in public, and maybe especially about religious matters. or the deeper matters of the spirit. So we find here an interesting example of Jesus being a taboo breaker, one who went beyond the barriers of his culture.
And oftentimes when I've read comments on this, it has focused on, the different stance, the unusual stance that Jesus took. It strikes me today that it was an unusual stance for this woman to take too. It was probably kind of a frightening thing for her in a public setting like that to be approached by Jesus, because she knew the taboo for sure. And maybe that's a bit as it is for us when we're approached by God for the first time, or for maybe not the first time, but approached anew. And where is this all going? What's the meaning of this? And we have our little ways of putting taboos.
Yes. I mean, it plays into what we were saying at the beginning, it seems to me, about the stagnation in life. I mean, a lot of times there does seem to be a call. We're in a rut and we keep going on, and life seems like a rat race, and the same things keep going on, and we almost get bored with our own thinking process maybe, and so the relationships seem to be going the same way, and got the same problem with the kids, or balancing the budget, or job-related things, and so on. And at times it seems like there's certain things that break us out of that. I guess you alluded to that before. I mean, it can be traumatic things like sickness in the family, or a death of a loved one, or the loss of a job, or finding out the youngsters are on drugs or something. I mean, very difficult things to deal with, and it seems as though it shakes us up and makes us move in some other direction. So that maybe is that part of that call out of a stagnant state. But I suppose that a lot of times it's more subtle than that. You'd have trouble putting your finger on it, exactly where this call comes from, or why is there an impulse in your heart to read a book, or go to a class, or take up a conversation at a deeper level with a loved one. Where does that come from? I think we think of it as the promptings of the Spirit in one way or another.
One of the things that I think we forget, too, is that just over the history of our understanding of the way the spiritual life develops, we've been shown that the call does become quieter and more subtle as we go along. If our faith deepens in its delicacy and its richness, it seems to me then that the call, too, is going to be maybe hidden, a little more hidden sometimes, and embedded in our life experience, and it's going to require that we look a little more closely at the ordinary of our life.
It makes you be more on alert, doesn't it? I mean, it's easier to miss. Like someone said, the grace of God is like the air we breathe. I mean, you can take it for granted, unless it's polluted, I suppose, but most of the time we take it for granted, and it's easy to miss. And the same way with grace abounds and surrounds us. We're encompassed by God's love, and it's because it is so much a part of our very being and creates maybe this natural desire for God, it's easy to miss it. And so we have to be very alert to the call. Maybe part of it is when you're feeling this stagnation, feeling like you need something to refresh yourself, then you're more in tune with it. But sometimes it comes maybe when you're not feeling that, and then you could easily miss this.
Your reference to, the grace being there just takes me back to Romans, the second reading for
Romans
for today.
5, yes.
That comment, that God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. It's there. And our challenge, it seems to me, is to turn and give our attention to that living water, that presence, that grace within our life.
Let's talk a little about this living water. We keep using that symbol because that's what it says. That's what Jesus said to the woman, right? That he's going to give her living water. And that symbol of water, I suppose, is rich in the Bible. And there are other places where people encounter God. Men and women interact at wells and at special moments and so on. So it seems like there's a remembrance in the gospel maybe of those other encounters. Go ahead.
Well, and even later in the gospel, when she goes off to tell the others, that she has met Jesus and that he's told her everything that she ever did, it strikes me that there must have been more in that conversation than just being told what she did. She must have discovered in the very conversation with Jesus, something of the meaning of it. And it seems to me that's what turns a lot of the stagnation in our life into living quality, that we begin to see it wasn't just an ordinary day at work. It wasn't just I got in the car, went to work, turned around, came home again, but that there was some other life permeating all of that. So this living waters is suggesting to us that we are called to be
more fully alive, that Christ gives us what we need to sustain ourselves. It's a life-giving force. Actually, water in the Scriptures is symbolized a lot of different things. One is salvation, the very healing power of God. It symbolizes God's grace. And it also symbolizes wisdom. It's interesting. Water is a symbol of wisdom. So that might be brought into our analysis as well here. It fits in with what you were saying, that maybe this encounter with Jesus gave this woman a deeper wisdom, an understanding of her life and where it all fit and who she was and how she was related to God. That would be part of this wisdom that's supposed to come from living waters.
Yes, and it's often struck me that when we consider something like wisdom and the development of wisdom in our life, we often, I think, expect that it will be that we'll grow in a knowledge of God, and indeed that's part of it. But I think what we see in her and probably experience in our own lives is that the growth in wisdom is a growth in an awareness of ourselves, in what is life-giving for us, what is death-dealing, what are those subtle ways in which I'm called to conversion. That's wisdom, which you don't recognize when you're a youth.
Yes. And there's a connection between the two, isn't there? St. Teresa of Avila said that self-knowledge was the path to prayer. It was the path to being in touch with God. And I think that surely is true, that in knowing ourselves in a deeper way is precisely when we come to a knowledge of God. So that God isn't known as some person up in the sky or as one more object in the world, but God is known as the source of our own inner life. God is known as the goal of the strivings of our heart, so that God is within the process and is known in a different kind of way. So self-knowledge, really when it's deep and when it's consistent and comprehensive, opens up our understanding of God. It's precisely how we know God. In fact, my teacher Karl Rahner says the experience of self is the experience of God. To know ourselves better is to know God. To love ourselves is to love God. Now, you might not make the connection explicitly, but to grow in self-knowledge really is to come to know the deeper things of life, and that is the referent that we have for the word God, the deeper matters of life, the source and goal. So that those two things, I think, do go together. So if we're saying Christ gives us living water, that's what the Gospel's telling us. Not just that he gave living water to this Samaritan woman, but he gives living water to us. So what does that mean? Well, he shows us how to understand ourselves in a deeper way. Helps us to know who we are. And who we are is we are related to God. We're open to the mystery that we name Abba, or that Jesus named Abba for us, the gracious one. And so the wisdom is really what we need, in a sense, to locate ourselves and to live more effectively.
And you know, the way that when she asks Jesus, about that, and he says, if only you knew the gift of God. I often hear that in kind of a playful way from Jesus. It's like it's right here, and perhaps the right here is in the very relationship with Jesus.
At that very moment.
That's right. And I think that's very true for us as well. When we're, perhaps at times burdened with the awareness that comes with self-knowledge, we're still invited at that moment to touch into that relationship with Jesus, which is the transforming experience, so that the self-knowledge becomes that living wisdom.
And would be occurring right now, isn't that what you're suggesting? I mean, that we encounter Christ in any moment of our lives. That's based on our understanding of the resurrection, that Christ in his resurrection is now present to the world, to all people, in all places, and all times. And so he's accessible that way. And at any moment we can encounter him as the woman at the well encountered him. And at any moment he's offering us living waters, which would be a deeper self-understanding and a wisdom, but it would be that interaction with Christ that would be the basis of it all.
Which is probably why at Lent, we do find ourselves drawn more to taking some time for prayer, which we know, in whatever way we define that, has to do with that relationship with Jesus and turning. I love the definition of Teresa of Avila, where she speaks of prayer as I walk and I talk with my good friend Jesus. Mm-hmm. Well, you can do that in lots of different places, lots of different experiences.
Sure, throughout one's daily life, yeah. Are there other things about the psychology of this interaction that fascinate you? I mean, he does point out to her marital status, right?
But he doesn't
says,
stay
go
with
call
that.
your husband and then come back. I have no husband. You are right. You have no husband. The fact is you have had 5. and the man you are living with now is not your husband, or you said is true enough. So it seems as though the Lord does take a specific circumstance of her life and use it maybe as a way of getting her to think more deeply. That's an interesting turn, it seems to me.
Yes, and that he moves with it in a forward direction. He doesn't stay with it in the sense of berating her for that experience, but seems to move forward, and perhaps is through that inviting her to reflect on that experience and make some choices where she wants to go.
In other words, she doesn't turn him off. I mean, it'd be easy to say, hey, what do you, don't mess with my head here. I got my own life, and I don't want to be bothered with this. See you. It seems as though, however he says it in the story, it opens up something for her, doesn't it? It forces her to think more deeply. I mean, it makes me think about how we would interact with friends or family members who we need to confront in some way, or where we're not happy with the situation. There's probably a lot of tact needed in that, and prudence, so that the result isn't that the person gets mad and turns you off and gets more recalcitrant or stubborn, but how are you going to say it in a way that would draw them forward to get them think more deeply and actually make progress.
And you can almost see that happens as the relationship itself deepens and develops. He's a stranger at the beginning, and then by this point, she's talking about him, or just after this, talking about him as a prophet. That's a big move. She's traveled a long way in her understanding of his frame of reference.
Yes, she recognizes him as the prophet, as we would say, the final, definitive prophet, the one that has the final word from God, as the greatest wisdom. In fact, Paul calls Jesus that. He is the wisdom of God. He personifies this larger understanding of what reality is all about.
And so with her awareness of his being that person, she can take more seriously and perhaps more trustingly the rest of their conversation.
And this moves her to the conversion point, doesn't it? I mean, you like to see the story, I know, as a conversion story, right?
Yes, and especially conversion to mission. I am just really fascinated that this woman has no sooner had this encounter herself than she's running off to tell other people, and that just rings very true to me about what happens for us when we've met the Lord. If it's been an authentic experience, we're really pretty determined to share it with someone.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about this conversion process, because that's one way to think of this gospel, is that it's calling us to make a similar conversion, to move out of this stagnant state or out of the rut we're in, and to drink in the living waters, to make them part of our very being, to respond to this call of God's grace, to become people who are more fully alive, to be reconciled people, transformed people, and having this deeper wisdom, all which I think is symbolized by this living water thing. So it really is a call to us to somehow be converted, as was the woman in the story here.
One of the things that a number of people in writing on conversion point out to us is that it always includes some kind of a shift, and something or someone new becomes the organizing principle for our experience. And I think you see that here in her. The organizing principle of her life prior to meeting Jesus was apparently the men who were in her life and perhaps her everyday experience. And by the end of the story, it's very decidedly a matter that Jesus has become that focal point. And I think for us practically, it's the same thing when we're called to conversion. There's a shift in what's going to be the center around which or around whom I'm going to organize my life.
Well, that's a telling insight, it seems to me, and I like that way of thinking about it, that what will really be the focus for me? What's the interpretive scheme? What's the larger picture which guides me? That's often a difficult thing to say, isn't it? Because there's so many cultural stories that come into play, and personal stories. Stories that could be paradigms for us, and models for how to live. So the culture gives us a story of what the happy, successful person is, usually economically well off and so on, well positioned in the society, having a certain power and influence. And that story plays into our heart, our imagination, and our reason, and often becomes the organizing principle in our culture. So I would see it as sort of with us always being in a conflict on that, that there's competing voices pulling at us and tugging us to come in different directions and to live out a different story here. And as you're saying, that to be converted, and for the woman it's to make the story of Jesus, and his gift of living water, the organizing principle of one's life, the motivating power, the focus, and so on. And I would think we would have that same struggle today.
That's right, and I think that's another piece that's always part of a conversion experience, is there is some struggle and conflict as we come into an awareness that we're being invited to make something or someone different the focal point of our life.
Well, what if somebody hears this gospel and says, well, but Christ is the focal point of my life. I really organize myself around the gospel. The Bible is my main text. I try to live out the church teaching and all of that. What are we going to say then to them about this call, that the Lord giving living waters?
Well, that call is continual. We used to understand the call as one that you received once for all, and having been converted to Christ, you then were pretty well settled in the way you were going to respond. I think today, partially because of our understanding of the way human beings develop, we realize that call is going to come repeatedly, and it may be a matter of my focus being sharpened a bit, or that self-knowledge we were talking about earlier, that's expanded a bit, and I find a new dimension of my life that I'm invited to bring in line with the ways of the gospel, the ways of the Lord's living. And so I indeed continue to be committed to the Lord, but there is something new in what I'm asked to surrender.
Yes, maybe that means that when I look at my life, my personality, my character, I see some parts of me that are not in sync with this organizing principle, that's sort of outside of the pale of the power of Christ's gospel. And we sort of know that about ourselves. It's not in sync. It's a problem area. And when we say to ourselves, well, I've got to get that under the sway of the power of Christ. I have to open myself to conversion. That's one way of thinking about what the conversion process is. So somebody says, yeah, I'm great, and I go to church regularly, and I deal well with people at work, but boy, when I come home, I'm a bear with my wife or with my kids, and that becomes the area that doesn't seem to be under the sway of the gospel. The living water hasn't touched that part, and so the person is going to say, well, I can't do that. I got to bring whatever it is that I do well at work, I got to do that at home, too. I got to treat my family that way, so I'm not always yelling at them or on their back or causing disharmony in the family. So I think the conversion can be a matter of saying what part of me needs to be brought into this fundamental movement and flow towards God.
I don't have an exact quote on this, Jim, but I do remember reading a statement of Rahner's where he suggests that God has known all of those areas of our life that are going to need to be brought under the sway of the gospel, if you will, and that in His mercy only reveals it to us bit by bit, that we'd absolutely be overwhelmed if we saw it all in the beginning. And I think that's very true.
Yes. Well, it takes us back to the self-knowledge thing we were talking about, doesn't it? We only gradually grow in self-awareness. I mean, it's hard to do. It's one of the more difficult tasks to really know who we are in a deep way, to understand both our strengths and weaknesses, and to bring into the light of consciousness the sort of pre-conscious or unconscious things that are often motivating us, the deeper attitude. So that is a lifelong process. The psychotherapist Carl Jung called it the process of individuation, of growth in becoming a more integrated individual. And I think the call of this gospel today is to move towards that greater integration.
And I think, too, we spoke earlier about the contrast between stagnation and stagnant water and living water. I think for many people, when they begin to click on that experience of the continual call to conversion, that in itself becomes a very enlivening experience, to be responsive to that call, to be alert to it as it unfolds. And so their life ceases to have the shape of a stagnant life. It takes on a more vital and living quality. I've
noticed that. People, once they start on the path of self-discovery and growth, don't want to stop because it's exciting and it's challenging and they want to do more. I think that's true. It's often you can't turn back. In fact, some people, they start to see things that they really don't like or things they have to change about their lives. It's very painful, but they'll often say, but I can't do anything else. I've got to work on it.
And maybe that's why this image of water is so appropriate here, because we can't do without water either. And once you've gotten a taste of it, we always go back for that.
To the living water. Caroline, you made one other statement that I wanted to pick up on, and that was the idea that the woman became an evangelist. As she went out, she was an apostle. She went to tell other people. You want to comment on that at all?
Well, yes, I guess I was struck with, initially she goes out and apparently shares her experience with those people. They may have been a little bit incredulous in the beginning, but then begin to even take her testimony, but they don't stay there. They come back and have their own experience. It says, so when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there. Many more believed because of his word. And then they go on to say, it's no longer because of your words that we believe. That's speaking to her. But we've heard for ourselves. And that just rings very true to me in terms of the development of a spiritual life. I can't ride on the experience that another person has had. As wonderful as that may be and as inspiring as it may be, I have to take the risk to go and meet God myself. And out of that personal encounter, however brief or simple or ordinary or profound, then I begin my own journey in faith. But she's in a key position, it seems to me, for helping those folks to start their journey.
Right, so she drinks of the living water herself, and part of her response is to share that, and when it works right, it draws other people in. And I think that does happen indeed in human life. A lot of times we're called, and through some good example or some kind word we say, it does sort of spread what we've been given. I often think that we've been given gifts, have to be willing to share that with other people. Well, Carol Ann, we've been talking here about the third Sunday of Lent, the A cycle in the readings, and especially this reading from John 4:4-42, Gospel of Jesus interacting with the Samaritan woman. And the key seems to be that Jesus offers her living water. It's a call to us today to move out of stagnation, to find a new refreshment, to be converted in our own lives, so then we can share this great gift with others.